Go tell and Rody.
Hey, it's Ethan.
Go tell and Rody.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. It's Mia. She's not dead, she's alive. She's back.
They found her? How? What happened?
I don't know.
I don't really think it's much of a stretch to say that Resident Evil 7 might just be the one thing that kept this series from becoming an undead monster. Hi, I'm Tally, and ever since I got an Xbox 360 and a copy of Resident Evil 5, I have been hooked on this franchise. I've played through as many mainline games that I could get my hands on, and if I couldn't get my hands on it, I would watch hours of content on YouTube about it. However, despite my love, I can safely say that the series started to get weird after Resident Evil 5. Games like Operation Raccoon City were awful. Resident Evil 6 is where I kinda checked out. I just couldn't finish that game, it wasn't what I'd fallen for. So insert Resident Evil 7, a game that the franchise desperately needed, and throughout this video I would like to explain a little bit about why I think that this is the case. Resident Evil 7 came at a time where Resident Evil couldn't be more from its roots. Every iteration of the franchise post 4 became a bit less about survival horror, and more of a Doom-esque power fantasy, where you punch boulders and giant monsters, with 6 becoming a worldwide romp in an effort to destroy a few different viruses, run from this dude, and apprehend this lady who I would most definitely let step on me. No, I take that one back actually. So here's where we go back to the franchise's roots. It's a bit more survival horror. Here, we go back to an evil looking mansion a la RE1, stalked by a super strong monster person like in 2 and 3, and there's plenty of that Resident Evil schlock that you can come to expect from the series. So throughout this video, I'm going to really break it down into 3 areas: the setting, the story, and the gameplay, and I'm going to talk about how these come together to bring Resident Evil back to its survival horror roots, and inject a healthy dose of life into this walking corpse of a franchise. So let's talk story. Resident Evil 7 serves as a super soft reboot to the franchise in an effort to de-escalate the scale of the series. So when I say super soft, I mean that it still exists within the established Resident Evil universe, with over 20 years of lore to dive into, but you don't need to know any of it. No talk of the T-Virus, the G-Virus, the C-Virus, T-Veronica virus, Plagas, Ouroboros, or any other crazy stuff that goes into older Resident Evil games. Just a husband, a wife, a new home, a family, and a litany of horrific imagery to deal with. Now, given a breakdown, you play as Ethan Winters, lonely husband and the most handsome pair of hands that the Resident Evil franchise has ever seen. Ethan has one goal that drives him throughout his time in Resident Evil 7, find Mia. She's our wife and she went missing 3 years ago. After getting a weird Snapchat from her, we end up at the Dolby residence where we are assaulted, stalked, and ultimately have to take down the Baker family in an attempt to cure Mia and escape with our lives, all while dealing with these abominations. This nightmare fuel, and a 6-year-old demon spawn. As with every Resident Evil games, it centres around a bioweapon, usually some sort of virus, but in our case it's this little girl, and she's able to control the minds of those around her and spawn creatures out of mould. Throughout Resident Evil 7, Ethan's going to uncover her mystery and seek to free those she's infected and ultimately put a stop to her. An overall summary aside, this is much like earlier Resident Evils in that it starts relatively small and expands as you struggle to uncover the mystery of what's going on and what's caused it. It's a small, quite personal story that allows you to get invested in what's going on, and I think that's a good thing. The game drops hints of backstory throughout the classic note system, and some new videotapes that give you the chance to dive into the history of the game and experience things from other points of view. Now, it is a Resident Evil story, and therefore it's going to get weird, and you're going to see some stuff that makes you scratch your head. But listen, that's part of the charm of the series. It's wacky, it knows it, and we're just here for the ride.
Welcome to the family, son.
Let's talk gameplay now. Resident Evil 7 actually has quite a simplistic gameplay loop, which is fair. The Resident Evil franchise has never been known for its groundbreaking gameplay. Now, in a first for a mainline Resident Evil, you play in a first-person perspective as opposed to the series' traditional third-person. This adds a different type of immersion with the series, where you're placed directly in the view of everything that's going on. This lends to the horror element by bringing you physically and personally a little bit closer into the action. Whereas early Resident Evil games opted to use fixed camera angles in order to create feelings of claustrophobia and make you wonder what's around the corner. Resident Evil 7 uses its first-person camera to literally pull you into everything, so you're still going to wonder what's around those corners. It still obscures a lot of your visibility, but it's just a different perspective. So this really still can create those familiar feelings of dread and anxiety that the series is known to provide. You're still very much in the dark, anything could be around that corner, behind that door, and really, you can't feel comfortable. If you can't see something, there's potential danger. You can't even feel comfortable around the walls, especially the slimy ones. And at the end of the day, it's a different type of scary than traditional Resident Evils, but it could be argued that that's what the series needed. Going back to traditional tank controls and fixed camera angles after years away could please hardcore fans, but really, that's not going to bring in any new blood to the series, which, let's be honest, we kinda needed. Moving on, let's talk combat. The game has a really simple setup. You have melee attacks, you have your pew pew, and you can block. And a well-timed block can save you a lot of damage. And outside of that, it's not a particularly complex combat system. You've got the ability to remove parts of your opponent to make them less of a threat, and, as is par for the course in Resident Evil, and zombie games in general I guess, you can pop them in the head for a chance at that sweet, sweet headshot splatter. Now, in terms of your arsenal, you've got quite a variety at your disposal. You've got pistols, shotguns, flamethrowers, grenade launchers, an SMG, and the classic Magnum. However, what you see is what you get, and what I mean here is that Resident Evil 4 and 5 both had an upgrade system with their guns in order to deal with the power creep of the game. As you would progress, you would then subsequently face tougher and tougher enemies and more of those tough enemies, and they kinda had that weapon upgrade system to compensate. Now, this is true to an extent in Resident Evil 7, that as the game progresses, you do fight tougher enemies and you do fight more of them. So the base weapons of the game are in fact pretty powerful. However, they're never going to reach the height you could in past entries in terms of power. And also, ammo's pretty scarce, so you're not always unstoppable. You don't have 100 round mags, gotta be careful with this stuff. And for our monsters, it really falls into two categories. We have molded, and we have boss fights. So the molded have four subcategories. Regular molded, which by and large are our zombie replacement for the game. They move slowly, they creep around, and they desire to take large bites out of your body, because that's what zombie stand-ins do. We have the bladed molded, and they're really just an evolution of our regular molded, but they have a higher damage output and they take a little more to put down. Four-legged molded are kinda like your Resident Evil dogs. They're our glass cannons. They can move fast, they can overwhelm you with speed, but at the same time, they have a bit less health, so they don't need as much to put them in the ground. And then finally we have fat molded. Think Left 4 Dead boomers, but without the utility of making monkey bombs out of their insides, and they just sponge bullets for a while. Again, not invincible, definitely a pain in my ass though. Then for bosses, we've got a handful. We have Jack, and he himself has 3 boss fights throughout the game. Jack 1 and Jack 2 are both in his humanoid form, and it's where the game shows off what Evie can mutate people into. Standard boss fight affair though, shoot him enough and he'll go to sleep for a bit. Only for a bit though, he will be back. And once you've cleared a good chunk of the game, he turns into a more classic Resident Evil abomination. It actually almost reminds me of like the blob form of Nemesis. Then we have Marge. She is horrific, she makes me sick. And I'll tell you why I like that later on. But similar again, put bullets in her and she will go to sleep. And then to cap it off we have Evie. She actually kind of harkens back to the Ouroboros style of boss fight where it's just a large black mass of tentacles. And realistically, it's more about cinema than it is about challenge, but it is in fact possible to die to this boss fight. So you can't just think that it's going to be a simple affair. And then moving on to the survival horror aspect of the game. Resident Evil 7, much like many games in the genre, has you carefully manage resources such as health and ammo. You can find these scattered about all locations of the game, and you can also find the components to make them, another classic Resident Evil trope dating back to 2 and 3. If you're careful, by the end of the game you will be a walking one-man army with enough ammunition to put down literally every enemy. But it is easy to run out of ammo if you're not using the right tool for the job. But on that, you can actually find times where you're incredibly starved of ammo, and it can take a really tense situation and make it feel worse, because while you can always have a knife, it's not very good. So there are definitely areas where if you are not careful, you're going to have to rely on that, and it's far from an advantageous position. And as I said, health needs to be carefully managed throughout the harder difficulties, and even on normal, if you're not careful, you will run out, you'll have situations where you're hanging on by a thread, and you have to play it incredibly smart or incredibly carefully. Don't waste your health, do not just heal every time you've got a little boo-boo. Make sure that you're saving it for when you need it, and you should be fine, but again, it's all about managing those resources. And then finally, we have a return to more of a classic puzzle system that the series is known for. You've got the keys, these weird spinny puzzles that get the job done, and a few other types of problems that you're going to have to solve throughout the game. The game does try and vary its puzzles from finding key items scattered across the map to a literal insidious death trap rigged from the Saw franchise, and in this room, overthinking is going to be the end of you. And that's the gameplay loop. Again, really fun, really simplistic, and it's easy to get into. Don't expect that you're going to have to pour hours and hours and hours into learning the game. Once you've gone through the first hour or so, really just more of that. Now, where I think Resident Evil really shines is its setting and its atmosphere. The game has an intensely creepy and almost supernatural feeling to it, especially in the early game. Each of the game's main locations derives some sort of element from the horror genre as a whole. The mansion evokes a nostalgic feeling from old Resident Evil games that should be a familiar sight for any fan of the series. Parts of the mansion and the old house draw a lot from films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I'll explain in a moment. And the game even has Saw vibes at some point, and all throughout there's this creepy, foreboding feeling that something's always lurking around the corner, that the doors and windows aren't safe, and on the other side of any wall could be some horrific monstrosity ready to end you, purely because it feels like it. So let me lay out the overall idea for the locations that you'll encounter during your time at the Baker residence. You've got the Baker Mansion and its sub-areas, the guest house, the old house, and the barnyard testing area. And then we have our other main locations. You have the ship and the salt mines. Each of these locations rely on you being forced into close quarters through tight corridors with lots of different threats. These close quarters encounters are made even more threatening by thinking that danger really could be anywhere, as well as continuously being stalked by not just the moulded, but the Baker family too. As the game progresses, it takes the simple concept of these tight areas and increases the tension by adding different obstacles on top of them, to push you a little bit and keep the anxiety at a steadily increasing pace. The game starts you off heading into the Baker guest house, where you're introduced to a few of the basics that you need to know in terms of combat, exploration, and it does a really good job of making you ask, what's going on here? Here we find Mia, so game over, right? Like we've succeeded? Well no, absolutely not. After finding and subsequently putting some projectiles in our wife, don't worry, she'll knock it off, we're knocked out by Daddy and taken to the main part of the game. So the Baker Mansion is the most obvious love letter to early Resident Evil. For starters, it's a mansion, literally an evil residence. And it also has a lot of tropes that both old and new fans should appreciate. The puzzles that are introduced are at a decent level, and they should demonstrate to old fans that the series can honour its roots, and they're generally easy enough that new fans won't be pushed away by the difficulty. In the context of the game, it really just serves to push you a little bit more with the basics. You'll be introduced to the basic enemies, and you'll be shown some basic puzzles as well. Ultimately, the goal of the mansion is to get out. However, in order to do that, we need to find 3 dog head keys. One is in a book, one is in a clock, and one is in a very conveniently located hook area. Just kidding, it's not convenient, it leads you to the boss fight with Jack too. It's a decent boss fight, and once we've overcome it, we head off to the old house. The old house serves more as an extension of the mansion. It doesn't want to reinvent the wheel here, but what it does do is give it an incredible layer of grime. And what I really mean here is that while mechanically the old house doesn't bring anything too new to the table, design-wise, it's probably one of my low-key most favourite designs in the game, purely because it's disgusting. Purely because that disgusting element really draws out feelings of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to me. And that's a series that really knew how to use grimy, dirty locations to make both the viewer and the characters involved feel uncomfortable. Everything about the old house really pushes me away, like I don't want to be in there, but that's because the area itself is just rancid, and I actually really appreciate that. I also really appreciate that the Marguerite boss fight that we find in the old house also has the same vibes. She's not a conventional boss fight in that she's just a stronger version of herself. She's a bit more body horror than that. Her arms and legs have extended in a really uncomfortable way, and she moves about like a spider. It's not like The Thing levels of body horror, but it's a little bit more, and it spices up the boss fight. She's disgusting and I hate her. Once that's done, let's head back to the main mansion. There's a few new secrets to uncover. And then the final Baker Mansion sub-area is the testing area. Again, this serves as really an evolution of what we've seen so far. Takes simple concepts, or tight corridors, and it adds a slight layer of complexity to it by putting bomb traps everywhere. These will punish you for not being careful and taking your time, and that takes advantage of the player's natural drive to move forward. As well as tripwires, they can also be found in boxes, and there's this damn thing as well. The area introduces the Fat Molded, which acts as a tiny mini-boss, nothing crazy, but we know I'm not a fan of them so far. And once you've gotten through the barn area, we get into what I like to call the Saw Room. This is going to punish you if you're not a fan of those VHS tapes, since the answer to this puzzle lives in the Happy Birthday tape. But if you're going in blind, it's going to actively punish you for being a gamer and checking everything. It is actually a really simple puzzle, but have fun dying a few times if you go in blind. And finally, the area is capstoned with another battle with Mutated Jack. It's pretty appropriate. He starts your mansion experience, so let's end the mansion experience with him. Slight caveat though, he has now taken on a true Resident Evil boss form, and he has eyes. Lots of eyes. And after injecting the cure to whatever is causing this into Jack, he's finally done though. He is definitely done. We will never see him in this game again. Most definitely. And once this is over, we're free, right? We've got the cure. We've saved Mia. Nah. We get dragged into the boat, so let's talk about that. Throughout the boat area, we play as Mia, and the general theme of claustrophobia continues. But again, the area tries to keep things relatively fresh by giving you very little weaponry while you play as present Mia for a good chunk of the area, meaning that you've got to play things smart and ultimately avoid a lot of confrontation, as opposed to just shooting your way through everything. This ultimately does change once you pick up the submachine gun, but getting there isn't the easiest thing ever. You are going to have to play it smart for a little while. In terms of scares and horror elements, it's not super traditional. It's just a generalised feeling of anxiety. You're surrounded entirely by mould and subsequently the moulded, so you're always aware that something could be coming at you, especially while you've got no weaponry or very little weaponry. It's not a fun time emotionally. You also play as Mia from the past, and this ultimately chronicles how Evie escaped, how the outbreak started, and what ultimately led to everything that's happened in this game happening. This part is a bit more actiony. It starts off and you've immediately got a submachine gun, you've got access to bombs, and it's not super difficult to just shoot your way through this part. I wouldn't really consider this a downside because it does change the pace of the game, it keeps things fresh, you can't have that constant anxiety, and this does allow you to just kind of let loose a little, to go on a little bit of an action streak, to go a little bit gung-ho, and it's fun, it's really fun. But again, you are still met with that constant sense of moulded are everywhere and you only have so much ammo. This area does ramp up as well, how many enemies you are going to be fighting, and it has quite a decent variety. You will fight all 4 of the moulded that we've encountered so far, sometimes at once. The ship area isn't too long, you can probably clear it in half an hour, 45 minutes once you know what you're doing, and once we complete the ship, brings us back to the present day, and it takes us to our penultimate location, the mines. While being by far the shortest area of the game, the mines serves as quite an appropriate climactic time. It takes everything that has been thrown at you so far and cranks it up just enough to make you sweat the first couple times you experience it. Everywhere here is full of traps and enemies, and it's by far the most high pressure area of the game. Aside from one story area in the middle, enemies and traps, they just don't stop. And when I say that there's lots of traps, like you cannot even walk upstairs without being punished. And you know how I keep saying that RE7 just loves to put you in tight claustrophobic areas? Well, this is literally a mine. It is all tight and claustrophobic areas. Then, to finally cap it off, if it does get quiet, in some areas you can even hear Evie. She's singing or chit-chatting, and you can't see her, but you know that she can see you, and it's quite a chilling sensation once you hear her. And towards the end, you reach what I like to call the gauntlet, where Evie throws as much as she can muster at you. You'll be forced into awkward positions where sometimes you can run and sometimes you're going to be forced to fight. However, in the gauntlet, stopping to fight could be the difference between life and unlife. It could be a case where you stopping to just pop a headshot is just enough time for the horde to catch up to you, to swipe you a couple of times, to trap you, and suddenly you're right back at the beginning because you've just died. Overall, the gauntlet is quite a stressful situation. The mines in general are capped off by a boss fight, a pseudo boss fight actually, against 2 fat moulded. 1 extra fat moulded and 1 regular fat moulded. These aren't the hardest things ever, but they are bullet sponges, and if you are incorrectly prepared, then you'll just have to go back to the beginning of the mine section all over again, grab a couple of guns, and get ready to go. Overall, the mines, while short, and being the most action heavy aspect of the game, is super fun. It's a really enjoyable experience once you've got a grip on everything, especially the gauntlet towards the end. It's a high pressure, high anxiety situation, but it is the closest thing that you'll get to that Resident Evil 4 or 5 experience of running and gunning. And that's okay. And after this, you only spend about 5 minutes in the final area, where it's just a boss fight, so this, as your final rush to the end, I'm a fan. So here we are, the home stretch. We've made it, and we're back where we began. We're back in the guest house, and this time, it's a little bit more Evied, and by that I mean she's really taken hold of Ethan, and she's just doing her best to absolutely ruin his day, sending hallucinations, showing us what happened at the beginning of the game. It's wild to think that Resident Evil 7 all just happened because this 6-year-old with godlike powers wanted a family, and it almost makes me kinda sad when you inject her with the toxin and she just goes, "Why does everyone hate me?"
Why does everyone hate me?
It makes me less sad, however, when she becomes the game's final boss, an Ouroboros-inspired absolute monstrosity that it is possible to die on, believe me, I would know. But once this is done and out of the way, you've just completed Resident Evil 7. So how did Resident Evil 7 really save the series? Well, it was the right middle ground that managed to attract both old and new blood to the franchise. It showed the fans that Capcom were capable of making a game that honoured the Resident Evil name and the survival horror genre at large. It took a lot of great things about the series and brought them together, and while I would be a liar to say that the execution was absolutely flawless, it did enough. It took so many tropes from older titles and mixed them in a really natural and believable fashion. You've got the mansion with its tight corridors, the anxiety, the stalker, the inventory management system, the puzzles, even down to the dumb dialogue. And it's a self-awareness that honestly kinda suits the franchise. It knows it's dumb, and that's okay. On top of that, the game wears its inspiration on its sleeve for wider horror in general, and I do appreciate that. I looked up some of the movies that it referenced, and honestly, the rabbit hole goes deep. But after looking at it, I actually really appreciate the lengths the game goes to in order to honour the genre. And I think that's the key thing here. While every game after 4 builds more and more into action, bigger and higher stakes, much more spectacle, this game just kinda wants to be scary again. Small stakes, really simple, and it did enough. Within the next week or so, we'll all be playing Resident Evil 8, and I truly hope that it takes all the good things about RE7 and improves on them in some way. From what I've seen so far, the game looks super promising, and I actually cannot wait. If you've made it this far, please make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Reading comments gives me something to do while I'm supposed to be working. Make sure to like the video to feed the ever-hungry algorithm, and subscribe so that you can be informed about my next videos. You have been amazing. I have been Tally. I'll catch y'all later. Bye.